Today, we're going to unpack the difference between egoic desires and divine desires. If we want to create a business that's going to be sustainable for us and fulfilling, as well as ultimately create prosperity in a lasting way, it requires that we get into alignment with our soul calling, or you could call it your soul purpose. And on a practical level, one way that we can do that is to discern the difference between our egoic desires and our divine desires. So today we're going to uncover and unpack the clues so that you can tell the difference and be able to make a choice from there of which direction you want to take. So first of all, I just wanted to unpack a little bit about why we should care about knowing the difference. And, this is kind of a fundamental principle that I work with my clients on all the time, because ultimately, when we serve our divine desires, we are being in service to the truth, right? And this is where you looking at your life from the grand scheme of things in the big picture, that I was put on this planet for a particular reason, right? I was put here to learn certain things, to grow, to express myself in certain ways in the world. And if we are actually showing up and following that curriculum that we were uniquely born to express, then we are fulfilling our soul mission, right? And there's lots of different ways that we can do that. And I firmly believe, and what I've found in my experience, is that the more we can get ourselves into alignment with that unique soul curriculum and what we're here to do in this lifetime, the more success becomes inevitable. The more there's absolutely no way that you're not going to make money, because the universe supports you and nature supports you in the expression of that fulfillment. So it's important in business to have goals. We have to have something that we can focus on, to aim for. And then by looking at our desires and our goals, we can have more conscious awareness about where those goals and desires are coming from, which will then allow us to have that discernment around, okay, well, which desire do I want to go with? And what is the right thing for me to do? And what is then from that decision, what are the right actions to take from there? Okay. So just to give you an example of how I made this mistake in the past, once I created a program based on an idea that I had. I had been working with a particular coach and I really liked the way she did things. So I had this idea, I'm just going to copy what she does because it's so awesome. And I spent months building out the content and making beautiful PowerPoints and all that kind of thing. And it was a great course. It was very valuable. There was lots of juicy things in it. And then in the end, though, I wasn't able to sell it. The people didn't want to buy it. I created something that nobody wanted to buy, and I wasted a whole lot of time and energy in the process. So this is what happens when we create from egoic desires. It's not that that journey wasn't valuable. Like, sure, I created some really great content and videos that I continue to use and repurpose in a different way, but it also set me back a lot in terms of the kinds of momentum that I could have created if I had channeled my energy in a different way. So I don't want you to come into this thinking like, oh, the perfectionist mentality is like, I have to get this right, like I can't make the wrong decisions and I have to do everything right. Realizing that every decision that we make is ultimately going to lead us to truth one way or another. But that the more we become aware of the choices that we have and the options that are available to us, we can decide which direction we want to go. And in my experience, egoic desires are ones that generally lead us down a path of misalignment, right? And again, misalignment can ultimately lead us to alignment, but that in the process, we end up wasting more time, we end up wasting more energy, we maybe even end up wasting more resources on things that we didn't actually need to get where we needed to be. And so it ultimately creates more suffering and hardship. And yes, being an entrepreneur is hard. It's not an easy path. But when we take the direction of egoic desires, we end up making things even harder than they needed to be. to go at the bare minimum. So another aspect of egoic desires to keep in mind is that you can take a path that you can follow through on your egoic desires up to a point. But then if you don't get the memo from the divine, from your purpose, from the universe, however you want to look at it, eventually the universe will force your hand and it'll kick you back into where you need to be. And I'm sure you've come across this idea in one place or another in your life, of this idea where the universe, first you get the whisper, then you get the tap, then you get the nudge, then you get the shove, then you get the 2x4, right? That the universe is always trying to guide us in the direction of our purpose, and we have free will. We can choose to go against it. But if we spend enough time along a certain path and we don't get the memo, the life will force our hand. It will force us back into alignment with our purpose, whether that's through a health crisis, or maybe you get fired, or you lose your job, or something dramatic happens if we don't catch the messages earlier on. And ultimately, that's to say that when we pursue egoic desires, whatever it is that we're pursuing is not going to last, right? It's not a lasting success. Maybe it's a temporary success or a short-term success, but it doesn't create that lasting, long-term, sustainable wealth and prosperity and success that following our divine path is going to give us. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention in terms of why I recommend listening to your divine calling or your soul desires over your egoic desires is that egoic desires, by definition, require pressure and force to execute. And I'll kind of explain that a little bit more as we get into it. But it requires a level of willpower that you might say is beyond what is natural for you. Okay, so we're gonna explore what I mean by that soon. So the next piece that I wanted to talk about is the qualities or the signs of an egoic desire. So how to recognize that we have an egoic desire. So the first thing is, an egoic desire always prefers to avoid change, right? And minimize risk. It wants things to stay the same. It wants you to maintain the status quo, because from your ego's perception, that's the safest way to be. Like to be among what I understand and what I'm familiar with is always better than taking a risk and going outside my comfort zone or trying something different. Okay. So an egoic desire will always opt for, let's just keep things the way they are. Okay. The second sign is that egoic desires tend to be very logical, right? And they often have an explanation or a story attached to it. So you might say, like, I really want to have a new website because then this and that will happen, and then people will see me this way, and then that will happen. There's a long story and explanation, and it's very logical, right? You're justifying. There's a justification around why you want what you want. The third sign of an egoic desire is that it's based on societal, cultural, family, or even personal conditioning. And what I mean by conditioning is that it's the values and belief systems that we've adopted that don't actually belong to us, that they're in the collective culture, they're in the world. We kind of pick them up, like a common conditioning that we talk about in my communities a lot is the conditioning around money and the perception of, it's a societal conditioning of perception that if you have money, a certain amount of money, then you are safe, then you are secure. And that message gets repeated again and again all over the media, right? Like when you see a commercial for home insurance or car insurance, you're like, or even investment insurance, they say something like, well, you can sleep peacefully at night knowing that your assets are safe with us, right? And so the message we're getting is, well, if you just collect and hoard all this money, then you're going to be safe, then you're going to be secure, then everything's going to be okay. Which, on another level, if we really examine it carefully, we know that that's not necessarily true, right? Because there are people that have very little money that feel safe and secure within their lives and their means and what they're able to do. And then there are also likewise people that have lots of money that, you know, make hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, or they're millionaires, and they're so stressed out about money and they don't feel safe and secure, right? So it's not the amount of money, although that's the message that we're receiving in the world, that having more money equals more safety and security and comfort, that's not actually the case. So this is what I mean by societal. We have cultural conditioning, like within your cultural background or within your religion, if you subscribe to a religion, or from your family history. Or when I say personal conditioning, I mean specifically with regards to traumatic experiences that you've had in your life. Like maybe something terrible happened, and from that point on, it really changed your view of the world. And you set some rules for yourself about, okay, from now on, this is how I'm doing things, because I'm not going to allow that to happen again, right? So, and another good example, I like to talk about, you know, use money as an example, because I think it's a form of conditioning that almost all of us can relate to in a profound way. So another example of that kind of societal messaging is that using credit cards, paying for something with a credit card is bad or shameful, because that's bad debt. It's considered bad debt, right? So the fact that it's bad, you know, it's a message of it being wrong, which then creates shame in people, right? And that having that belief system has an impact on your ability to use credit cards in your life, perhaps preventing you from using a credit card skillfully when required, or when it becomes an asset and an opportunity for you. So that's just some examples. So egoic desires are always fueled by, grounded by some sort of belief in societal, cultural, or personal conditioning, and realizing that just because that conditioning is not really truth for you, it's not necessarily reflection of what is natural or in alignment with you. It's just a message that you kind of picked up and adopted as your own. And a good clue to indicate conditioning is to notice when you say should, like I should do this, right? Because when we say I should do this, well, who is it that told you that, right? Where did you get that message? You got it from somewhere else, not from you, right? So the next sign that we're looking at egoic desires is that the ego always prefers instant gratification. It wants things immediately. It wants the short-term gain and avoidance of avoidance of the long-term pain. And it, you know, so there tends to be a restlessness or an impatience if there's kind of a perception of wanting like a magic bullet, or like just give me this one thing and then all my problems are solved. That's an aspect of instant gratification, or like wanting a quick fix, basically, is something that the ego always would rather just feel comfortable and get what they want in the short term, even if it creates long-term pain and consequences in the end, right? It doesn't see it that way. It doesn't understand the truth underneath it is like, while yes, I am getting that short-term comfort, but then the price that I'm paying is I'm actually going to suffer more in the long run. But it doesn't bring awareness to that aspect, to the fact that there's actually going to be more long-term suffering. It just focuses on the short-term view. So you could look at it also that way, that it's a very kind of a short-term view of the situation. So another sign of the egoic desires it feels comfortable and safe. So what the decision that is made from the ego will have a sense of comfort and safety to it, and will avoid feeling any sense of fear, shame, guilt, or anything else. So it's any other negative emotion. So a decision that will allow you to feel a sense of comfort and safety in the short term and avoid any shame, guilt, or fear, any experience of shame, guilt, or fear. And a good example of that is, for example, when we have a desire for, let's say in your business, you want to make $10,000 a month. And your reason for wanting to make $10,000 a month, and again, there's a reason, there's an explanation attached to it, which is also a sign of the ego, is that by paying off my debt, I want to make $10,000 a month so that I can pay off my debt. Because then I will feel less stressed about my bank account. I will feel more at ease about my financial situation. It won't stress me out to check my banking, right? And all that kind of thing. So making that money is required in order to feel a sense of comfort around your credit card debt, for example. So that's an example of a desire that creates safety. And if you look at it on a spiritual level, okay, so you want this thing in order to create a sense of safety, but where does the safety really come from? Does it come from the number in your bank account? No, it comes from inside of you. And that's the truth, right? The truth is that your sense of safety and comfort can only come from inside of you, and stability. So the next sign that you are looking at an egoic desire is that there's a feeling of wanting to prove something or protect, proving and protecting. So the ego is, as you may be familiar with the ego, it's the sense of me and mine and my identity in the world and how I want people to see me and how I want to see myself and what I want for my life. And there's a desire to prove something and to receive external validation in the process, right? To prove, for example, I want to make $10,000 a month so that I can finally prove to my parents that I can make a living as a business owner, that this is a successful business, or so that I can prove to myself that I can be successful in business. Do you see that? There's a proving motivation underneath it. And the protection part of it is, again, it kind of speaks to this aspect of the comfort and safety and the avoidance of lack, right? Because the ego is fundamentally driven by a perception of lack. And that comes from the fact that as human beings, on some level, we know that our time on this planet is finite and that at some point everything is going to go away. We're going to drop everything. We're going to drop this body. And it has this motivation to survive and that everything is limited and everything is finite. So that's the way it sees the world. And we just have to accept and acknowledge that. But just realizing that the ego will always come from a perception of lack in the situation. And so if you understand that egoic desires are there to prove something or to overcome a sense of lack out of, a motivation to survive, what kind of energy does that require, right? It's like, let's say you're doing a launch and you feel this sense of, oh my God, this has to work, because if this launch doesn't work, I won't be able to prove that I am a success in business, or I won't be able to prove to my parents that this is legit, or I need to have that money because I need to survive. I need to pay my rent and whatnot. What does that do to your energy and how you show up to that launch? You bring pressure, you bring force. There's a, a chasing, there's a grabby energy. There's a like fighting, I gotta fight for this energy. And that feeling of pressure and force really has an impact on the quality of how you show up to the action, right? Like people can feel that. It's, sales conversations are a great example of that. If you come into a sales conversation, and I acknowledge that a lot of this is subconscious, right? A lot of this, we don't even realize that this is what's really going on. But when we come into it, within the back of our minds or subconsciously, like, I need this sale because I need to pay my bills. And if it doesn't happen, then I'm screwed. And you come into that conversation with that fear that's going on subconsciously. How do you think you're going to show up in the sales conversation? You're probably going to be pushy. You're probably going to put a lot of pressure and be more aggressive in how you show up to it, or show up in a way that demonstrates that you don't feel safe, that you're stressed out, and you're not grounded and solid in what you're doing, because there's this feeling of I have to survive. And then that is in turn going to have an impact on the person you're talking with and their experience of you, which usually what happens when people pick up on that energy, whether they're consciously aware of it or not, their reaction is to, eject, right? Like, nope, this doesn't feel right. This isn't good. And then even if they might have been a potential good client for you, they may turn the other way just because they're picking up on vibes that are not positive and conducive to a kind of relationship that they want to have. So realizing that ultimately with egoic desires, having this need to prove or force something or will something into existence creates a kind of energy that is ultimately going to make things a lot harder for you, and to have strategies that you implement not necessarily work out as well as they could have if there wasn't that pressure and force and all that willpower that's necessary behind it to drive an egoic desire. Excuse me. The last sign of an egoic desire that I want to share with you today is that egoic desires, because the ego can't see into the future. And when I talk about ego, I'm talking about that sense of me, but it's also connected to the intellect, right? And what our mind can perceive, our ego mind, our intellect can perceive, is basically we can only perceive the past and what's happening in the present moment. We can't see into the future. Our ego and our mind can't see into the future. It can have theories, it can have fantasies, and it can only go based on past experience in the present moment. So realizing that the ego will always look to the past, look at your past experiences and be like, well, you know what happened last time when you did this, right? Or maybe it could be directly related or it could be unrelated, but your ego is always looking at what happened in the past as a point of reference to what's going to happen now. And the tendency is to repeat the patterns of the past rather than creating a new potential in the future. Oh, and I have one more. Actually, I have a couple more. Just emerged from what I just shared with you. Egoic desires are often, and this is connected to the conditioning. It's another aspect of conditioning, is that egoic desires are often based on an idea. It's based on a concept. It might be a fantasy, but it's not necessarily grounded in what's true or what's right or what's needed in the moment. It's a concept. Like an example of that I hear a lot from new business owners are like, I need to get a website. I have to make sure that I have this website because then everybody will find me and my business will be out in the world. And as if it's the answer to all of their business problems. And I have to burst that bubble for them, because no, in fact, it's, especially these days, your website is kind of like a business card, as your social media profile is also, but it's not as essential as other things. And so egoic desires come into it based on an idea, a preference, a concept, a belief system that it happens to have that is not necessarily grounded in what you actually need. And so one thing that I often have my clients looking at is, where are my preferences playing a role here? Am I doing what is really needed from me, or am I choosing to do something that is really a preference, or what would make me feel more comfortable, or what I think is more sexy or more exciting, and it's not actually what I need? And then the last thing that discerns egoic desires is it's always about you. It's always about how this is going to be personally advantageous. So it advances my realm, my cause, right? My life, my business, my health, my work, my money. Maybe secondarily, it might impact people that belong to me, like my family members, my community. But it's always about something related to me. Okay. So that was a pretty exhaustive list, but I thought, why not just let's lay out as many indicators as possible. So now let's talk about divine desires, or your soul calling. Your soul calling encourages you to grow and expand beyond your comfort zone, which means that oftentimes the sensation associated with following a divine calling or having a divine desire is that it's exciting and expansive and also scary. Okay. So it's interesting because you can have fear, and ego can drive decisions based on the avoidance of fear, as we talked about earlier. And yet in a divine desire, you can also have fear, but it's a very different sensation. And this is why learning to tune into your body, listening to your inner guidance and the sensations through your body is a really important part of learning discernment and navigating your path in your business, because we need to be able to tell the difference between a fear-driven, survival-driven desire and one that is expansive and exciting and that's going to open doors for us, but that also happens to be scary. So we talked about the ego favoring short-term gain and ignoring the fact that there'll be long-term pain associated with it. The divine, in its infinite intelligence, can see the big picture, can see the long term, whereas the ego can only see the past and make decisions based on the past and the present moment. The divine can see many years ahead, right? It can see the master plan, it can see the big picture and the high level. So divine calling and divine desires will favor short-term pain, short-term discomfort, and long-term lasting benefit or gain, having blessings in the long term, having benefits in the long term. Divine desires, like I said, they can feel exciting, expansive. It might feel like a sense of peace. It might feel like a sense of love, that finding, for example, a niche or an offer that the thought of doing it makes you feel so much love in your heart that you can't wait to share this with people. That's another sensation associated with alignment with your divine desire. And the soul understands that, yes, it's natural to be scared when you're entering into new actions that are scary for you, right? That scary means growth. That scary means you're entering new territory. When it's when you're doing something that's really in alignment for you. That I think there's a false perception that if I'm in alignment, I'm going to feel comfortable. And that's not the case, because the divine really wants you to grow. You know, our ego can have all kinds of desires of, I want to make a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time, and I want it to look like this. And the divine will say, well, you know what? Maybe you need to learn this lesson first, or maybe you need to have this experience first. And maybe it's not going to deliver the goods, the material wealth in a linear fashion in the way we want it, right? Because we all want this, right? This is what we want to experience in terms of clients and money. But that's not necessarily how it works, because sometimes we need to go through certain experiences that allow us to grow, that gives us a perspective, that gives us some wisdom, that then allows us to enter into the next phase. So the divine isn't just focused on material wealth and illusions of security. It's really in it for like you as this soul that is incarnated on this planet. What are the lessons that you need to learn in order to fulfill this mission in a sustainable way? Whereas with the egoic desires, we're creating a pipe dream, right? We're going for this quick fix, this magic bullet, and we may get some short-term success. It may work out in the short term, but then boom, it all collapses in the long term. The soul says, I want you to grow and understand this and learn these skills and have these experiences so that what you create becomes sustainable in the long run. Right? Isn't that beautiful? When we align with our divine desires, our actions give us energy, right? They're supported. It's like you get a tailwind, you get infused with more light. And that ultimately, while yes, different phases and different actions take time and they take effort and energy, that we are not wasting time, we are not wasting resources, right? If we make a decision from alignment with our soul calling, the universe supports us in that. It gives us the energy, it gives us the resources, it provides for us whatever it is we need so that we can fulfill it, because that's what's in harmony with our nature and with what we're here to do, the curriculum of what we're here to do. Divine desires don't have an explanation. It doesn't have a story or a justification attached to it. Maybe our own mind can take and attach meaning to it. That's a different story. But in and of itself, divine desires and divine direction doesn't have an explanation. It's just an instruction. Like often in my case, I receive a lot of divine guidance auditorily. And so I can think of a scenario where the divine, this isn't business related, but the divine said to me, buy tickets for Elbow. Like it just told me to buy tickets for the concert. And that's it. Buy tickets for Elbow, plain and simple. I've also had instructions to buy an amp for an electric guitar that I don't even own yet, right? Like the divine just told me to buy an amp. So the instructions don't always make sense, but the significance of doing it is that when we listen to those instructions and we follow through on them, we're creating a positive feedback loop with the divine, right? It's like, I heard your instructions, I got the memo, and then the divine, and you follow through on it with your action, that gives that positive feedback to the divine saying that, okay, you listened, you heard me, you trusted me. So then in turn, you start to receive more direction and more clear guidance. And it just reinforces the whole process. And that in the process of listening and following through on your divine guidance, that's where the blessings come, right? Realizing that the blessings and the success and the accomplishment and the wins are not because of the strategy or that the thing you did was the exact perfect mechanical solution to the problem you were in. It's the reward for having listened and trusted and followed the divine guidance, right? Because the divine is your one source and supply of all things. The divine is abundant. We know this theoretically, but when we start to follow the divine's instructions and really adopting the divine desires as our own, that's where we get to tap into that abundance. And the fact that the divine, having this bird's eye view, can shortcut your process, can see the fastest path to having whatever it is you want. And that fastest path may not be a linear path, and it may not look the way you want it to, and it may not unfold the way you expect it to, but that in the grand scheme of things, it's actually the fastest, most direct path to having the life and the experience that you want to have. So the divine's calling for you is always guiding you towards self-realization and fulfillment. It's not, again, it's not about just my own personal agenda of like, I want money so I can feel safe. It's really about you discovering the power that you have, you discovering the love that you are, you discovering the impact that you can make, and the wisdom that you have, and all of that is just as important, because this is also a wealth as much as money is, or any other material thing that you might want to pursue. So it's all part and parcel together when you follow the divine path. And it's fundamentally based on a belief in abundance, whereas your egoic desires are based on a belief in scarcity. And next, another sign of divine desires is the very nature, and I think this is the hardest part for those of us who are very intellectual, very logical, and in our ego mind, is that the nature of the divine is mysterious. It's uncertain. It's nonsensical, and it's unknown. We can't see where we're headed. All we can see is how do I listen to the next instruction? Like, what is it that I need to do next? And it's like breadcrumbs. We know what we know when we need to know it. And when we need to know something else, trusting that that will unfold. And that is really the essence of creativity, isn't it? Right? Being able to go into the unknown and just being open to whatever direction this wants to take. And I think this is the hardest part for people, because a lot of us want a sense of control. We want to have a plan. We want to know where we're going. And we want something logical. We want to understand how to do it. And that's all the ego mind kind of thing. And so the divine really wants us to surrender and trust the process, even when it doesn't make sense, and just follow the breadcrumbs, one step at a time. One thing will need to lead to the next, and that we will get the message of what we need to know next when we need to know it. And lastly, divine desires are not only good for you, but they're good for everyone involved, right? They're not just of a personal advantage nature. It's really about what is in the highest good for myself and for everyone involved. And really, that is the sense of prosperity and abundance that we want to create. This is about something so much bigger than our small desires. And that, I think, is also one of the really big advantages of following a path in your business and in your life, of following your divine desires, is that what you end up creating in this process of going through the uncertainty and trusting that whatever's happening is for my highest good, that things unfold in unimaginable ways, that the outcomes and the richness of the journey are so much more than you could have ever wanted for yourself. And in the process, you end up having all of the material things that you ever wanted. But what the ego wants for you is so much smaller than anything the divine wants something so much bigger for you. The perception of the ego desires are so much smaller and minimal, and just really kind of holds you in a very small capacity of what's possible for you. And the divine can see the fullness and the richness of you and your power and what's really possible for you. And so following this path will not only allow you to create unimaginable outcomes that you weren't expecting, but as a byproduct, yes, you do get to enjoy the money and the success and wealth and all the other ways that your ego really wants. But it's a byproduct of you really stepping into your power, into your alignment, and the ability to really surrender and just show up for what you're here to experience in this life. So that was quite an exhaustive list, and I hope this is helpful for you. I would love to hear in the comments which one of these signs really stood out for you or was the most eye-opening for you. What really stood out and kind of shifted your perspective today? And I would love to hear it in the chat. So thank you so much for watching today. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do click like and subscribe so that more people can see this video, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.